Hi, this is Nick Karn, and this is my EDL 850 Module 13 lesson about tort liability. So what is tort liability? To define tort liability, first you have to know what a tort is, which is a civil wrong for which a remedy may be obtained, usually in the form of damages. Tort liability, when it is applied to schools, refers to the fact that school administrators, teachers, support staff, coaches, and etc. could be held liable for causing harm either intentionally or unintentionally. So the types of torts, number one is the intentional. So you have several different types of intentional torts. You have assault, which is an overt attempt to physically injure a person or create a feeling of fear / apprehension of injury. You also have battery, which is the actual physical deed that is threatened by the assault. C is false imprisonment, and so in an educational setting, false imprisonment can be defined as intentional confinement by direct physical means, threats, or by the assertion of legal authority. Also, false imprisonment can mean that there is no escape, there's no exit plan, so that kind of sums that up. And then D, defamation. So under civil tort, a person can be held liable for false statements that tend to harm another person's reputation. And the two examples I used here are slander, which is spoken defamation, and libel, which is written defamation. And we need to be careful as teachers or administrators to make sure we are not, first when it comes to written or libel, we're not writing down anything that's false, or our own opinions, we're just writing down facts and exactly what happened in the case. And slander, we're not at the water cooler having talks about personal information or the confidential information of a student and what they may have going on with them. And then the other type of tort is negligence. So really are just not deliberate actions, but instead present when an individual or an entity fails to act as a reasonable person to someone he or she owes a duty. To understand negligence in an educational setting, it is important first to analyze four elements of a negligent tort. So they are duty, which is the duty to act; breach, which means you do not act upon your duty; and then this causes injury, and obviously those are the other two. So cause and injury are the other two elements of negligent tort. So it's up to us to make sure that we know our duty and that we're not breaching that duty so we don't accidentally cause injury or harm. So the 5 examples I have here, case number 1, it was a case out of Connecticut, and the summary, and I'll just kind of sum up the summary here. There was a 13-year-old student who was running cross country and tripped over a bench, and the family sued the coach and the school for negligence, and the government actually favored with the coach and the school just because the kid was a volunteer participant here. Also that it was off school grounds and after school, and they were protected by the immunity clause when it comes to governmental employees. So if this happened at my school, what reactive measures would have occurred? I think pretty much the same thing that happened in the case. It kind of depends on the situation too, because of how big our school is and how many kids participate in sports or possibly even PE. It kind of depends on the situation. So if it was maybe in PE, there would have been more damages awarded to the family since it's on school grounds. But since it was after school, I feel like it would be the same thing for us if it was after school track practice. And then what proactive measures? I think the coach is just more aware. Accidents happen. And as a football coach, we know this, and we just need to make sure that the physical environment is safe and that the more eyes, the better. So maybe if another coach was there to kind of help out with that, make sure that the bench was removed and not in the way. It's a tough case when it comes to that because it was an accident. So I think if we just have more coaches or just more eyes, people who can help with that situation would have been proactive. And then describe a professional set of ethics that would be beneficial. Just training coaches, telling them about torts, telling them about that they can be sued for these things, and that we need to make sure that we as administrators are informing them and training them on what is a way to avoid these situations. Case number 2, another sports situation here. A student went to go get his ankle checked during a football game. The assistant athletic trainer looked at him, said he was good to go. Kid did cuts, he moved around, he looked fine, so he went back out there. Then received another injury that actually was a spinal injury and ruined the student's career as an athlete. So Again, the court favored for the school because really athletic trainers are protected by regulations. Um, Again, it was tough because it was tough for the family to argue this because the student was a volunteer, was checked out. Student said he felt fine with his ankle, so he went out and played. And the ankle didn't really directly result in his injury with his spinal. Football, any sport with contact, you have that risk of spinal injury due to that. So it was hard for the mother to make a case, really, and um, it was not the athletic trainer's fault in this case. So, what reactive measures? I think it would have been a little different here because again we have a lot more athletic trainers. We always have at least one on site that's professionally trained, not just an assistant or a student manager or a student athletic trainer. So I think it's always important to have medical staff on site for every single athletic event in case things like this happen. We can also train our coaches to be more aware of these things. We all go through concussion training, but we don't go through any kind of athletic training. So I think that would be a good way to prevent it. And then professional ethics, again, is just being a professional, just truly caring about kids and making sure that you're not putting a kid in danger by, in saying, you know what, we want to win this game, so let's put them out there. Let's actually look at the situation and make sure the kid is safe before they go out there. So going back to a classroom, this case was actually close to my hometown in Nebraska. I remembered it from when I was actually studying law in college. Kids were playing London Bridge, as you can see in the picture there. The teacher turned around for a sec to write something on the board. The kid was flung into a bookshelf and had to get stitches on his head, 50 stitches actually. So it was a pretty bad injury to the student, and the court actually ruled in favor of the family here and the student by awarding them for medical expenses and permanent disfigurement and $5,000 for pain and suffering. So, a little over $20,000 for all that. So the case here is that the students were not supervised apparently because the teacher was not watching them and turned around, and that's what happened. So again, reactive measures I think would have been the same. I think we as teachers know our responsibilities to watch our kids and to make sure that they're not participating in anything dangerous. Again, accidents happen, so we need to make sure that they're covered in some way, but we need to make sure that we are training our teachers what torts are, because this is the first time I've heard of torts. So I want to make sure that my teachers know that they can get in trouble for this stuff. They need to be vigilant at all times and make sure that we'll protect them, but at the same time they also need to know that they can protect themselves. And then professional ethics with this tort liability would have just been, pay attention, and maybe when they're doing physical activities, make sure that you're really watching, because we don't want a student to get hurt because of an activity that we organized and that we weren't watching and we weren't supervising. So making sure that we are present in the classroom, that we are paying attention to all the things the kids are doing. It's impossible to be everywhere at once, but if you are sponsoring or conducting an activity like this, you need to make sure you're vigilant. Case number 4. So this one's a little different because it has to do with transportation, and it also has to deal with special needs. So the student here actually suffered severe convulsions while on a school bus, and the bus driver did what they should have done and requested a school nurse be provided at the next stop, but none was provided. So the driver was actually told to take her to the daycare center, and then she received medical treatment, which was a couple minutes after the convulsions. So it was too long of a time span there. And so the mother sued the school district, the bus supervisor and the school principal, the nurse and the teacher, and she claimed that the school personnel negligence and gross negligence in failing to provide adequate care dramatically decreased the student's life expectancy. And so the court actually ruled in favor of the school district due to the issue of that the school nurse was not available because she was out of town, and that was just one of those weird situations. So the bus driver did everything that he or she could. The teachers did everything he or she could. They followed protocols. So yes, the student did suffer convulsions, but the bus driver did everything in their power to get them to a safe place as soon as possible. So um, again, reactive measures depends on the school district's policy with this. Now I know that we have nurses and paras on school buses because of this reason, and make sure that they're always supervised. Proactive measures, I think making sure you do have the proper staff on board is good, but also training bus drivers what to do in those certain situations. If there is not a nurse available, I think the bus driver did everything they could in their power at the time, but maybe we get a little more training on that. And then finally, describe how a set of professional ethics here. Again, telling people that these things can happen whenever we're on school property, and that includes a school bus. So it can happen anywhere at any time. So we need to make sure that just because it's at a school bus doesn't mean that we're not going to get some training to this. So this also means training people who drive the buses, the transportation, making sure that they know what's going on, as well as teachers and staff. And finally, case number 5 here, Devin, who was a student in this case, was a 7th grader who had a issue of chronic absenteeism and did not really come to school very often. And then he came back to school. The PE coach said that they were doing field hockey, and it was towards the end of the unit, and so they played a game of field hockey, and Devin had missed the whole unit because of this, and he had no training in it at all. So they favored actually for Devin, who received an injury during this final game in field hockey, and the court awarded the family $1.3 million in damages. So it was a pretty big case, and this was actually in Canada. So this was interesting to see because the student had been there, missed the entire unit, still participated in the final. It's almost like an assessment in physical education when they play that final game. So I compare it to in the classroom. I'm not going to have a student really take a test if they miss the entire unit. I want them to get caught up first, or maybe we find a way to make up that unit in some other way. So it's just I can see why it happened. I think any teacher can make that mistake, but it did result in a lawsuit. If this happened at our school, reactive measures, I think the PE coach would have been, in some trouble. But at the same time, I also think our district does a pretty good job at, waivers and signing off on certain things. And I think every student signs a waiver when it comes to certain activities, like if we played field hockey, that they can't sue if it's resulted in an injury because of a school activity. So I think our district's kind of ahead of the game on that, a lot of that stuff, just because of cases like this. Proactive measures for preventing such a tort, I think just again letting PE teachers know that this can happen, and that especially them dealing with physical activity all the time, that injuries can result. And so maybe, that waiver that parents sign off on for PE is important, but also teaching our coaches or PE teachers that they need to really focus on paying attention to who's here, who's not, what's safe, what's not, and using your professional judgment. And that goes along with your professional ethics. Just saying, if a kid wasn't here for an entire unit, maybe it's not a good idea for having them to participate in the final assessment of that unit. So that's kind of everything that I came up with. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation, and please leave me any comments for feedback that can improve this presentation. But hopefully that you learned something, and I'll learn from you guys as well. Thank you.